Are you tired of not being able to take portraits indoors because you have low light and no flash? Look no further. In this video, we're going to show you how to create stunning portraits with minimal equipment in low light conditions. So, whether you're a beginner or an experienced photographer, these tips are going to help you master indoor low light portrait photography. So my first tip is, if you can, use a tripod. A stable base is crucial when you have low light. It can keep your camera steady and it allows you to use a slower shutter speed because your camera is more stabilized. But we also know that depending on the types of photos that you're taking, this isn't always possible, so we've got plenty of other tips. Tip number 2 is to slow down your shutter speed. To allow more light into your camera, set your shutter speed to a slower setting. And keep in mind that the slower the shutter speed, the more motion blur you might get, so you really want to make sure that you're stabilizing your camera well. The third tip is to open up your aperture. By doing this, you can let more light into your camera's sensor, and it also creates a nice shallow depth of field. Most of the time, if I'm taking photos in low light, I try to get my aperture around 1.8 or 2.5 if I can. So fourth, boost your ISO. If you need more light, that's what you've got to do. Keep in mind, higher ISO can result in more noise in the photo, so you want to keep it as low as you can, but don't overthink this. Most of the time, grain or noise in a photo is not nearly as obvious as we might think. So, number 5, think about the available light and use it to your advantage. Look for natural light sources around you, like lamps, windows, etc., and place your subject near that source. I love using windows whenever I can. You can have your subject stand to the side of the window to create nice side lighting, or you can have them placed in such a way that the window light is falling directly on them right from the front. The 6th one is to reflect light. If you don't have natural light source, or you don't have very much, use a reflector to bounce light back onto your subject. That can be an actual reflector, fabric, a whiteboard. I love to use mirrors for this. And number 7, experiment with your camera settings. Don't be afraid to play around and see what works best for you in your particular shooting situation. In low light, I tend to use the maximum aperture that I can get away with based on how much of the photo needs to be in focus, and then I choose the slowest shutter speed that's reasonable for that setting, and then I set my ISO as high as it needs to go based on those other 2 things. Now, of course, there's always room to change it up and revisit those settings, but I found that that's a really good starting point for me when I'm shooting indoors or in a place with really low light. So as we wrap things up, remember, the key is just to be creative and don't be afraid to experiment with different techniques. Find what works best for you. Remember that every situation is going to be different, so what works in one place may not work perfectly in the next. But by having these tips in your back pocket, you're going to feel a lot more prepared, ready to take amazing photos, even when the lighting isn't ideal.